Get back! Traitor!
1 minute ago, Britain was shaken to its core. The Supreme Court has delivered a thunderous judgment that has not only shattered Keir Starmer's secret EU ambitions, but also unleashed a wave of outrage across the nation. This was not just another ruling. This was a bombshell revelation that exposed a betrayal so deep it has left Parliament in chaos, the public in fury, and the Labour Party on the edge of collapse. What the judges revealed was never meant to be seen by ordinary citizens. Hidden drafts, encrypted messages, and whispered negotiations between Starmer's inner circle and EU officials now dragged into the light. Britain has just witnessed the unmasking of a conspiracy that could have bound the country back under Brussels' control without ever asking the people. And the fallout has only just begun. The morning began like any other in Westminster, but by the time the clock struck 9, a political earthquake had erupted. 11 Supreme Court justices, in a unanimous ruling, delivered a verdict that tore apart Keir Starmer's covert EU framework and branded it unconstitutional, unlawful, and dangerously undemocratic. Their words carried the weight of history. They accused Starmer and his closest advisors of attempting to deceive both Parliament and the public through secret backroom deals hidden behind the language of harmless trade negotiations. But the truth exposed in court was far more sinister. According to the judgment, Starmer's team had been drafting agreements that appeared on the surface to be simple economic partnerships. Buried within those documents, however, were clauses that would have quietly reintroduced EU regulations over key British industries, reinstated European legal jurisdiction, and undermined the independence the people had voted for in the Brexit referendum. It was, in the words of the justices, a constitutional ambush, a slow and deliberate attempt to reverse Brexit without ever calling it by its name. The ruling laid bare a chilling strategy. Rather than openly campaign to rejoin the EU, the plan was to creep back step by step, embedding Britain into Brussels structures under the guise of cooperation until the difference between member state and independent nation vanished. Each move would have been small enough to avoid public outrage, each clause framed as technical necessity. But the end game was clear: full integration without ever asking for the consent of the people. The court declared this a direct assault on parliamentary sovereignty and an unforgivable violation of democratic trust. As the verdict spread, the atmosphere across Westminster shifted from shock to disbelief. MPs rushed out of offices, journalists scrambled for explanations, and phones buzzed with messages of panic. What had been whispered rumors in political circles now stood as hard evidence, stamped and confirmed by the highest court in the land. Starmer's plan was no longer speculation. It was exposed fact. The judgment, spanning over 100 pages, described not only the legal flaws of the scheme, but also the deliberate deception at its heart. The justices, in unusually fiery language, warned that such conduct posed a grave threat to Britain's constitutional order. Outside the Supreme Court, crowds gathered in fury as the news broke. British flags waved in the air, and chants of "No EU betrayal" and "Defend our democracy" echoed through the streets. Protesters carried placards calling Starmer a traitor, and many declared that this was the closest Britain had ever come to a silent coup, an attempt to erase the people's voice not through ballots, but through secrecy. For those gathered, the ruling was not only a victory, but also a confirmation of their worst fears: that the political class would never stop trying to overturn the Brexit decision, no matter how clearly the people had spoken. But behind closed doors, the fallout was even darker. Within Labour's headquarters, panic spread like wildfire. Advisors shouted, MPs argued, and ministers scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Some claimed ignorance, others insisted they had dismissed rumors as speculation. But with the court dragging every detail into the light, emails, encrypted messages, draft treaties, there was no place left to hide. The collapse of plausible deniability had begun, and Labour MPs now faced the terrifying prospect of being destroyed by association. For Starmer himself, the ruling marked the collapse of credibility he had spent years trying to build. Once presenting himself as a man of integrity and stability, he now stood accused of orchestrating one of the most audacious betrayals in modern British politics. The press wasted no time. Headlines screamed of Labour's EU treason, while commentators called it the greatest political humiliation since the expenses scandal. Front pages carried images of furious crowds, damning quotes from the justices, and leaked drafts that laid bare the scale of the scheme. And yet, as the storm gathered strength, Starmer remained silent. His only response was a brief, pre-recorded statement claiming the ruling had been a misinterpretation of his intentions. But the words rang hollow. The evidence was too overwhelming, the verdict too direct. Silence, instead of calming the crisis, only fueled it. Every hour without explanation intensified public fury. Every day without accountability deepened the sense of betrayal. Within Parliament, whispers grew louder. If Starmer refused to step down, the party itself might face annihilation. Meanwhile, the political consequences began to snowball. Nigel Farage seized the moment with fire and precision. Standing before a roaring crowd outside Parliament, he declared that Britain had been one step away from betrayal on a scale never seen before. He accused Starmer of conspiring to sell the nation back to Brussels in exchange for power and prestige, and he demanded permanent safeguards to ensure no leader could ever attempt such treachery again. His words struck a chord, spreading across social media in viral clips that fueled the anger of millions. At the same time, Rishi Sunak's government moved quickly to capitalize on the crisis, drafting emergency legislation under the banner of the Sovereignty Protection Act. This sweeping reform, now being rushed through Parliament, would ban any government from signing agreements that altered Britain's sovereignty without both a parliamentary vote and a binding referendum. Early polling revealed overwhelming public support, with nearly three-quarters of Britons backing the measure. For them, it was more than just law. It was a shield against betrayal, a promise that their voice would never again be silenced behind closed doors. For Starmer, however, the act was a humiliation beyond repair. Parliament was rewriting the rules specifically to prevent leaders like him from ever attempting such schemes again. His silence was now a symbol of weakness. His leadership, once framed as steady and pragmatic, was collapsing into paralysis. And as anger boiled across the nation, one thing became clear. This was not just a political defeat. This was the beginning of the end. The courtroom ruling did not just expose Keir Starmer's private negotiations. It revealed a web of backroom promises, veiled agreements, and covert attempts to drag Britain closer to Brussels without the consent of Parliament or the people. What makes this even more shocking is the sheer scale of secrecy that surrounded it. Documents unearthed in the trial showed private correspondence between senior advisors and EU officials, spelling out frameworks for alignment on trade, security, and even immigration. These weren't harmless talks. They were carefully calculated steps, hidden in plain sight, designed to reverse what millions voted for in the Brexit referendum. The Supreme Court's judgment stated clearly, no Prime Minister, no party leader, and no minister has the authority to make binding commitments that alter the constitutional direction of the United Kingdom without first putting it before Parliament. This single line shattered Starmer's entire defense. He claimed these were exploratory conversations, but the evidence proved otherwise. The fallout was immediate. The opposition benches erupted, with Tory MPs calling it the betrayal of the century. In the House of Commons, shouts of "resign" echoed across the chamber as Starmer sat motionless, his face pale, his usual composure gone. For months he had portrayed himself as the man of integrity, the figure who would bring stability after years of political turmoil. But now, that image lies in ruins. The press wasted no time. Headlines screamed about treason, betrayal, and the Supreme Court's damning words. Crowds began to gather outside Parliament, chanting, waving flags, demanding accountability. Some even called for a general election to cleanse Westminster of corruption. The sense of betrayal wasn't just political, it was personal. Ordinary citizens who trusted Starmer to stand for transparency and fairness now feel deceived. But the most dangerous element lies not in the courtroom drama, nor in the Westminster chaos, but in the streets of Britain itself. Anger has spilled out into demonstrations across London, Manchester, and Birmingham. Protesters clashed with police outside Downing Street, demanding Starmer's resignation. The Supreme Court's ruling has ignited a fire that no politician can easily control. The ruling wasn't just a legal blow, it was a spark thrown into a nation already weary from economic struggles, rising costs of living, and years of political division. For many, this verdict confirmed what they long suspected, that the elites were working behind closed doors, trying to undo the will of the people. And yet, while Starmer reels from the blow, whispers from within his own party have begun to emerge. Senior Labour MPs are reportedly furious, accusing him of endangering their credibility just as the party was climbing in the polls. Some have already begun making discreet phone calls, floating the idea of a replacement. Leadership challenges, once unthinkable, are now openly discussed. Labour insiders describe a party in meltdown, with loyalists clinging to Starmer while others quietly prepare for life after him. The Supreme Court ruling has not only destroyed his EU plan, it has shattered his authority within his own party. Still, the story does not end there. The court documents revealed something even more sinister: a timeline. These were not vague aspirations, but scheduled plans, with set dates for announcing joint policies and frameworks with Brussels. That detail alone has thrown the nation into panic. How far did Starmer really go? What else has not yet been revealed? And if this is only the beginning of the leaks, what darker truths lie ahead? The nation now waits, breath held, as more files are set to be released in the coming days. Westminster is bracing itself because what has already been exposed is enough to topple a leader. But what comes next could rip open the very fabric of British politics. The storm inside Westminster was now unstoppable. The Supreme Court ruling had torn open the wound, but what followed was nothing short of political carnage. Senior figures in Labour, once loyal to Keir Starmer, began to question whether their leader could survive this humiliation. Some MPs whispered that Starmer had gambled too much, playing both sides, promising the public one thing while secretly chasing another. The revelation of a hidden EU framework, supposedly designed to ease Britain back into European institutions without a public vote, was seen as the ultimate betrayal. It was no longer a policy disagreement. It was treachery in the eyes of his critics. The court's words echoed across the country. Parliament was misled. The public was misled. The Prime Minister knowingly concealed material agreements. That line, repeated in headlines, replayed on every broadcast, was political poison. On the streets, protests turned into something far more volatile. In London, thousands gathered outside Parliament, waving both Union Jacks and signs demanding Starmer's resignation. Chants of "traitor" and "resign now" drowned out the Labour Party's carefully crafted messaging. What had started as outrage over secrecy now ignited a deeper fury. Questions about sovereignty, democracy, and whether Britain's leaders were truly acting in the people's interest. Police struggled to contain the growing unrest as groups of furious citizens clashed with counter-protesters who insisted Starmer was protecting Britain's economy from collapse. The nation was splitting into two camps, and the Prime Minister stood right at the center of the storm. Inside Downing Street, panic set in. Advisors urged Starmer to issue a public apology, to admit to errors, and to promise a new vote before any further talks with Brussels. But Starmer, cornered and desperate, refused. His pride, his vision of Britain's future, and his iron will clashed with the reality of the Supreme Court's words. To back down now would mean total surrender. To continue forward, however, risked collapse of not just his government, but perhaps the entire labor movement he had built his career upon. Cabinet ministers began holding private calls among themselves, discussing contingency plans. If the Prime Minister could not weather this storm, then someone else would have to take the reins before the entire system fell into chaos. The whispers of a coup grew louder.
Then came the leak. A confidential email from within the European Commission surfaced, confirming what the court had already hinted, that Starmer's government had agreed in principle to align Britain with EU trade regulations. Binding commitments without parliamentary approval. The email exploded like a bombshell. This wasn't speculation, this was proof. And the nation's anger boiled over into fury. The idea that Britain, after years of division and bitter fights over Brexit, could be silently pulled back under Brussels authority without a single vote in Parliament was enough to push the public into open revolt. Starmer's silence became his greatest weakness. Every day he refused to speak, every hour he stayed behind closed doors, the more he looked like a man with something terrible to hide. Across the Conservative benches, opportunists saw their chance. Calls for a vote of no confidence thundered louder. Newspapers that once tolerated Starmer's pragmatism now branded him the man who lied to Britain. What made the crisis even more dangerous was the monarchy's quiet involvement. Sources whispered that King Charles himself was deeply concerned about the constitutional breakdown. For the monarch to intervene in party politics was unthinkable, but the situation was spiralling beyond control. Britain's stability was at stake, and the man at the centre of it all, Keir Starmer, looked increasingly isolated, cornered, and perhaps doomed. The people were demanding answers. The court had destroyed his credibility. The press had sharpened their knives. And now, even his own party was circling like wolves. Starmer was running out of time, and the nation knew it. Britain was standing on the edge of a constitutional crisis, unlike anything seen in modern history. The question was no longer if he could survive, but when the inevitable collapse would come. But here lies the most dangerous part of this entire saga. What happens next? The Supreme Court ruling may have destroyed Starmer's secret EU plot, but it has also opened a new battlefield in British politics. What many believe to be a straightforward legal case has now spiralled into a full-blown constitutional crisis. With the court's decision, a hidden truth is now exposed. Britain's sovereignty was being placed at risk behind closed doors, and those responsible thought they could get away with it. The verdict has sent a chilling message across Westminster. No leader, no matter how powerful, is above the law. And in that single moment, Keir Starmer's carefully crafted image as a safe, stable, trustworthy leader has begun to unravel. The whispers inside Parliament now grow louder by the hour. If the Supreme Court's words are to be taken seriously, then Starmer was engaged in back-channel negotiations that could have compromised the nation's independence. His promise to respect Brexit while quietly aligning Britain closer to Brussels was not just a contradiction, it was a deception. And now the people know. Anger is spreading like wildfire from working class towns in the north to conservative heartlands in the south. Ordinary citizens are demanding accountability. Protests are being planned. Petitions are gaining tens of thousands of signatures. Social media is ablaze with one single unifying demand: Starmer must go. Yet Starmer, true to form, refuses to step aside. Instead, he and his allies are spinning the narrative, painting the Supreme Court as politically motivated and insisting that the ruling is nothing more than an attack by his enemies. But this strategy is failing because it ignores the obvious truth. The court did not invent the documents, the emails, or the private commitments made to EU officials. The evidence is real, the betrayal undeniable, and even those within his own party are beginning to question whether he can survive. Labour MPs, once united behind Starmer, are now divided. Some openly defend him, while others, sensing the danger, are quietly preparing for a leadership challenge. This is not just a legal defeat for Starmer, it could very well be the death blow to his political career. The timing could not be worse, with Britain already facing an economic downturn, strikes and rising discontent. The idea that its leader was secretly plotting to hand power back to Brussels feels like an unforgivable betrayal. And here lies the true shockwave unleashed by the Supreme Court. If Starmer is removed, what comes next? Will Britain descend into chaos with no clear leadership at the top? Or will this ruling serve as a reset, a chance for the nation to reclaim its independence once and for all? The media, sensing blood, has turned the story into a frenzy. Headlines scream of betrayal, of conspiracy, of a nation on the brink. Some outlets are calling this the greatest political scandal since Watergate. Others suggest it could trigger a snap election, with the king himself forced to intervene to restore stability. And for Starmer, the pressure is unbearable. His public appearances are met with jeers. His speeches are drowned out by chants of traitor. His approval ratings, once stable, are collapsing at record speed. This is no longer about policy or politics. It is about survival. Meanwhile, inside the corridors of power, a darker truth is whispered. Some suggest that Starmer was not acting alone, that there are still powerful figures within Westminster who want to undo Brexit by stealth. Could the Supreme Court's ruling be just the beginning, a crack in the dam that will soon burst open, revealing the full scale of betrayal? If so, then the fallout will not stop with Starmer. It will consume others too, civil servants, advisors, even MPs who thought they could hide in the shadows. The court has lit a fire that cannot be extinguished, and Britain is about to witness political purges unlike anything in modern history. And then there is the question of Europe itself. How will Brussels react now that the plot has been exposed? The EU had placed its hopes on Starmer as the man who could quietly realign Britain with European structures. With that plan now shattered, will they retaliate? Will they seek to punish Britain economically? Or will they attempt to back a new leader more willing to play their game? The Supreme Court ruling has not just shaken Britain, it has rippled across the continent. European leaders are scrambling, trying to assess how much damage has been done and who will emerge from the wreckage to lead the United Kingdom into its uncertain future. But perhaps the most chilling element of all is the precedent that has now been set. For the first time in modern history, a sitting Prime Minister has been exposed by the highest court in the land as engaging in secret negotiations that undermine the will of the people. This ruling has not just destroyed Starmer's credibility, it has shattered trust in the political system itself. If the man at the top was willing to deceive the nation, then who can be trusted? What other secrets lie hidden in the shadows of Westminster? The Supreme Court may have exposed one plot, but the people now suspect there are many more waiting to be uncovered. And so Britain stands on the edge of a precipice. The streets are restless, Parliament is fractured. The monarchy may soon be forced to act, and at the centre of it all is Keir Starmer, a man who thought he could outwit the people, the system, and even the law. But the law has spoken, the mask has slipped, and the fall has begun. The only question left now is this: will Starmer's downfall destroy only him, or will it drag down the entire political establishment with him? Because once the people taste betrayal, once the truth is laid bare, there is no going back. And that is why this Supreme Court verdict is not just the end of Starmer's secret EU plot. It may very well be the beginning of the end for the entire Westminster order.